Hey everybody, it is Friday, July 25th. We've made it through another week here on the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill just got back from Nashville where I taped a podcast with Kyle Matthews. He's a real estate CEO, but he started a podcast called The Matthews Mentality, where he dives into entrepreneurs and CEOs and leaders and gets into the mindset of success, what brings you there, the tools you need in the workplace. It was a fascinating conversation, actually led to a lot of introspection and questions, since we normally just talking about like news and headlines and media. And he's like, well, why do you think you do it that way? And why did you think of that? And so anyway, appreciate going on that, Kyle, and we will let you know when that podcast comes out.
All right, I look forward to hearing it. Now let's get to some headlines. Tension between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell in plain sight as the two tour a Fed building in Washington, D.C. and go back and forth trying to get the last word. We'll play that awkward exchange caught on camera. Overseas, a hunger crisis in Gaza, but who's to blame as ceasefire talks break down? And one of the biggest countries in Europe says it will recognize Palestinian statehood. In business news, the FCC approves the $8 billion Paramount-Skydance merger.
Jill, the latest tie-up and merger for our old stomping grounds at CBS.
And a look at the state of local news, why it matters that local newsrooms continue to get smaller.
Yeah, not a good thing.
In tech, Apple is out with a public preview of iOS 26, its biggest iPhone software redesign since 2013. So what's in it? The official passport ranking index, where does the U.S. stand? And remembering pro wrestling legend Hulk Hogan, dead at the age of 71.
Jill, many of us remember growing up on Hulk Hogan and WWF. So the latest death this week to hit certain generations harder.
Well, they say they happen in threes, right?
Yes, Warner, Ozzy Osbourne, and now Hulk Hogan.
And it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating. Okay, let's start with the 5-minute drive President Trump made around the block in D.C. Thursday to the Federal Reserve Bank headquarters. For months now, President Trump has said Fed Chair Jerome Powell is doing a terrible job, threatening to fire him, going as far as calling him a total moron because he has not lowered interest rates.
And that was one of the nicer things he said, Jill.
And on Thursday, the two men were together in person, touring the renovation of the Fed's headquarters in Washington, as the president is ramping up criticism of Powell for holding interest rates steady. He has also been more critical of the Fed building renovation, which is over budget. At one point, Trump and Powell went back and forth about the cost of the project. So, Moshe, I'm going to play a bit of their exchange. For anyone who hasn't actually seen it, picture these two men in suits and ties and hard hats. The president pulls paper out of his pocket with what he says is the cost of the renovation. The project is costing $2.5 billion. Trump says on the paper it is $3.1 billion. Jerome Powell shaking his head. He reads from the paper himself. And then the two men just in this tit for tat trying to get the last word.
Yeah, it was like a scene from the TV show The Office. The body language is really something to see here, but hopefully you can get a bit of it here with the audio.
Billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot. So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed.
Yeah, it just came out.
Our notes had it about 3.1 as well.
3.1.
3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added.
Our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building. Is what that is. That's a third building,
Well,
including
no,
the
but
Martin building.
it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So we're going to take a look.
Moshe, I was watching this live on TV and I was physically uncomfortable at just how awkward it was. All of a sudden I was watching Jerome Powell shaking his head as Trump was talking and I'm like, oh my God.
So Jerome Powell's entire job is like being specific with numbers, right? Data. Like that's what you do as Federal Reserve Chair. You're studying the data. Every number matters. Trump, we know, will often add zeros, multiple zeros. He's a man of hyperbole and exaggeration. He's like, you get my point. You get my point. So you had like him, like, you know, throwing out this new number for renovation costs. And Trump will be like, no, that is not actually true. Like, the numbers matter. And Trump's like, yeah, it's like, it's all part of the same thing, because he's trying to make an argument here of what's going on. Now, remember, Trump appointed Powell 8 years ago. He doesn't like him anymore. He wants him out. He's been trying to make life hell for him to get Powell to go away. Powell's term ends in May, and it's legally dubious as to whether Trump can fire him over his job as the Fed chair. Now, where Trump is really diving in here are these renovations. Like, is there corruption here, et cetera? Now, billions of dollars of renovation, that's significant, right? But this is a very old building. It's a 100-year-old building, the Federal Reserve building, that's never really been renovated. And remember, with all of the security threats, the various conspiracy theories about the Fed, they have to install all these new seismic protection measures, blast-resistant glass, upgraded walls. They got to make sure the building's secure. They're creating space underneath. Remember, DC, especially that part of DC near the National Mall, is built on swampland. So it gets extremely expensive. Now, at the same time, it is several $100 million over budget. 3,000 people will work there. There's a whole bunch of details. The bottom line is, Joel, that ultimately Trump doesn't like it. And also, it's very rare for the president to visit the Federal Reserve. You give the Federal Reserve this independence. So they are effectively neighbors there on the National Mall. It's the White House. You make a turn down the National Mall. You go a couple blocks. You get the State Department. And so Trump visiting here was quite a sight.
And then you had one reporter asking the president, as a real estate developer, how would you deal with a project manager who is over budget? Trump said, generally speaking, what I would do, I'd fire them.
Trump likes to fire people?
But back to what is really bothering Trump, Powell not lowering interest rates. He and the other Fed governors have said that they want to hold rates steady because they want to gauge the impact of Trump's tariffs on the economy and inflation.
Yeah, and so that has really infuriated Trump here. He believes that slashing interest rates will save the U.S. hundreds of billions of dollars in interest costs. Because remember, high interest rates, well, who borrows a lot? Well, you or I or anybody out there might borrow and have to deal with interest rates. But ultimately, the U.S. government has to pay $1 trillion a year in interest, given how much we borrow. Remember, we're $36 trillion in debt as a country. That's what the government funds everything that it's doing, since we haven't balanced a budget since the 1990s. So Trump very much wants the interest rates to come down. The problem is, when you lower interest rates, you make borrowing cheaper, more money goes in the economy. The worry there, more money out there, people will buy more stuff, prices will go up. There's an inflationary impact to all of that. So that's why Powell has been very cautious here, even though Trump is just hammering him, including in person yesterday, right? Though that part of the conversation, Jill, came across a little more fun or lighthearted. It wasn't like him yelling at him about interest rates, which totally was a possibility depending on Trump's mood yesterday. But again, the Federal Reserve does its own thing. Their goal at the Fed is the long-term interest of the economy. Trump's goal is his short-term political interests. And that's one of the reasons that Fed chairs typically left alone to do what they need to do, and why the markets watch all of this very closely, because the markets want somebody at the Fed who is thinking about the long-term economy and not thinking about the short-term needs politically of the president who is there at the time. Well, we will watch this building situation. Remember, Trump's a real estate guy, right? So he felt very comfortable in his situation. I think Caroline Levitt posted on social media, like in his element, wearing that hard hat, touring the renovations.
And it felt like Jerome Powell, not in his element. Very uncomfortable.
Like, if there's anyone who looked more awkward wearing a hard hat, it was like Jerome Powell. Like Jerome Powell, like behind his computer. It was big on him. Like looking at a Bloomberg terminal to determine interest rates, like that. That's Jerome Powell's like safe place.
Okay, now to the Middle East, where the humanitarian situation in Gaza is getting more dire. Specifically, the head of the World Health Organization says Gaza residents are suffering from man-made mass starvation, blaming Israeli restrictions on aid. It is an assessment echoed by more than 100 humanitarian organizations. The WHO reports at least 21 children have died from malnutrition so far this year, although they warn that the figure is likely to rise. The UN World Food Program saying 1 in 3 people in Gaza go multiple days without eating. Israel, though, is pushing back hard. They are acknowledging that there is a, quote, lack of food security inside of Gaza, but they say that the aid agency's claims are Hamas propaganda. Israel is pointing fingers at the UN for failing to distribute hundreds of truckloads of available aid sitting on the border inside of Gaza.
Yeah, there's been a lot of finger pointing, unfortunately, for some Palestinian people in Gaza who are just looking for food. In fact, in this back and forth, the Israeli government yesterday brought a whole bunch of media to the border to show media the drop off point where all the food aid, all the truckloads of aid are just sitting there on the border. Now, the UN, for its part, says that things are unsecure right now. There's been a lot of looting in Gaza, instability in Gaza, so they haven't been able to pick it up and deliver it, and still say that whatever you still even have there is still not enough. And on top of that, you have the UN refusing to work with the U.S. Israel-backed group called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They've hired U.S. contractors. We've told you about them, these security sites. And the UN has a couple issues. One, this is UN turf. And Israel has made a point specifically of going after UNRWA. This is a UN group that specifically deals with the Palestinians, and they've been effectively defunded here. Effectively, they have allowed Hamas to do its own thing. And so the Israelis have very much felt like the UN not a fair arbiter in the region. They've set up these alternate sites. The UN doesn't want to work with the Israeli-US sites there. And on top of that, these US-Israeli sites have become very, very unstable, very dangerous. There have been multiple shooting incidents nearly every day, killing dozens, if not hundreds of Palestinians. It's hard to get firm figures based on the data there, but ultimately some of this is due to Israeli military shooting. Some of it has to do with Hamas and Palestinian gangs, just a very unstable situation. And that's what's actually led a lot of Palestinians to stop going to those U.S.-Israeli sites. And then at the same time, you have issues with the UN sites and a lackluster amount of aid there as well, restrictions, movement restrictions, a whole variety of things. Keep in mind, folks, that Gaza is the size of the city of Philadelphia. We're talking about a 9-mile by 25-mile area, and in some areas even narrower than that. Now, let's back up here in terms of kind of what we've seen in recent months. Back in March, that's when the Israelis cut off all supplies to Gaza. They only partially lifted that blockade in May. As of March, they said more than enough is in there, and the Israelis said that the issue right now is Hamas is stealing a bunch of aid. They're then selling some of that aid and then using that money, selling free aid to Palestinians to fund their own needs. So they said this is a lifeline for the terror group. We're cutting off aid. And they were trying to create these alternate zones, these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation zones. But that, again, the zones that they've been trying to distribute from have, again, been very unstable. Some of them have never been set up. The UN is not cooperating with them. The Israeli military, will often view large groups as a threat. And so there have been, again, numerous civilians killed at those sites. Now, I will add to all of it, Jill, that one group that has no interest in things becoming stable in Gaza either is Hamas, which cynically knows that images of Palestinian suffering help them in negotiations. So the Israelis have actually been distributing social media pictures of Hamas in tunnels eating food, saying, well, these guys have food. The bottom line, Jill, is you have a situation where the Palestinian civilians who live there are the ones suffering, right? The UN has its issues and says not enough is coming in. The Israelis say you need to pick this stuff up and use our sites, but those sites could be a death trap at various points. You have Hamas, who doesn't give a damn about anything. And so, unfortunately, this is where you're at. And on top of that, and it's been very interesting to watch the coverage of this, Jill, especially in Israel, where Israeli media is covering these potential concerns now around famine, around a lack of food, after 2 years where there have been a lot of claims by activists in the UN that have turned out to be misleading or false in regards to this. So there's a lot of people in Israel who view, it's another famine claim, because ultimately a number of these claims, if you track them over the last 2 years, turned out not to be true. But now if you look at analysis of market prices, actually what's going on, media organizations, they're like, no, this time there's a crisis here when it comes to food availability in Gaza, in terms of just there's not enough people going hungry right now. Something needs to be done immediately. And those are some of the conversations that you're seeing. But just to give you context as to why you see skepticism from one side, why you see cynicism from another side, why you see the UN the way it is right now. And again, unfortunately, we're nearly 2 years into this war here, and there's no entity there in Gaza that is trusted by the Israelis enough. The Israelis also don't see it as their full responsibility to handle this stuff, because ultimately this was a country or a territory in Hamas that attacked them on October 7th. So a lot of complexity here. But again, this appears to be a very concerning humanitarian situation that is unfolding here that we'll be watching very closely.
And in the meantime, there had been reports that Israel and Hamas were close to some type of ceasefire deal. It appears there has been a setback. The U.S. has withdrawn its delegation from Qatar, where it was participating in ceasefire negotiations this week. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office also announced that its negotiators in Doha would be leaving. The reason? Hamas's response to the latest ceasefire proposal. U.S. Special Envoy for Peace Mission Steve Witkoff writing on Twitter, Hamas, quote, clearly shows a lack of desire to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. While the mediators have made a great effort, Hamas does not appear to be coordinated or acting in good faith. We will now consider alternative options to bring the hostages home and try to create a more stable environment for the people of Gaza. He also says it is a shame that Hamas has acted in this selfish way. We are resolute in seeking an end to this conflict and a permanent peace in Gaza.
Yes, there's been a lot of back and forth, Jill. These are all variations of the same deal that we've seen negotiated, in some cases agreed to over the course of the past 2 years. The newest reports is that Hamas is demanding the release of 200 Palestinians who are serving life sentences for murdering Israelis, plus an additional 2,000 Palestinians who've been detained since October 7th. Now, the Israelis apparently had offered 125 prisoners who were serving life sentences, saying, wait, what's this 200 thing? And remember, this is all in exchange for the 50 Israelis who remain hostage in Gaza. And when we break that down, it's actually the remains of about 30 Israelis. Only 20 of the 50 hostages are still believed to be alive at the moment. But that takes me back to the previous story, because Hamas knows that these images of suffering by Palestinians globally will increase pressure on the Israelis. So again, very cynically, the longer they hold out and the longer you see these images from Gaza, the more pressure will fall on Israel to concede to the new Hamas demands here. So it's very interesting to watch these statements from the various sides, and just sad that, again, so many people are suffering in the process. The hostages who sort of remain there after 2 years, as well as the Palestinian people who are looking to, be done with war and start to rebuild in what will be a decades-long process in Gaza.
And one more development, French President Emmanuel Macron announcing Thursday that France will recognize Palestine as a state. It is a big diplomatic move that comes amid global anger, as you're mentioning, over the hunger crisis in Gaza. Israel denouncing the decision. Macron saying in a post on X that he will formalize the decision at the UN General Assembly in September. He wrote, the urgent thing today is that the war in Gaza stops and the civilian population is saved.
So keep in mind here, this is a very symbolic move, but symbolism still matters, and France is now the biggest Western power and the first G7 country to recognize Palestine. If you look globally, about 140 countries around the world recognize Palestine as a state, including some of the smaller countries in Europe. But France doing this is a significant move, and that means that, who's next? Is it the UK? Is it Canada? Are there other countries that may do this? Now, there are some domestic reasons for this in France. France has the largest Muslim population in Europe, about 9 million Muslims, so it's a big issue there. You've seen huge protests. So Macron facing domestic pressure. Incidentally, I should mention, France also the country with the third largest population of Jews in the world. After Israel and the US, you have about 400,000 Jews who live in France. Again, the complicating factor is Palestine doesn't have recognized boundaries. They're to be negotiated between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority. One added issue is the Palestinian Authority doesn't even have authority over all the Palestinians who live in those various territories, right? They govern some of the West Bank where Palestinians live. In the meantime, as we know, Gaza, governed by Hamas. Ultimately here, some complicating factors as we talk about recognizing a country as a state, because typically you would do it after there's recognized borders, there's a capital, there's a leader who controls everything in that country. But Macron here trying to make this move partially again to register frustration with Netanyahu. Now, Netanyahu's response yesterday was that this rewards terror, this rewards Hamas for October 7th. And now the French pushing back, saying, at some point, nothing is really budging in the region, and we feel this is the right move.
Time for the speed read, starting with some major business news from Mo News. The FCC cleared the way Thursday for an $8 billion merger between Paramount Global and Skydance Media. Paramount, the owner of CBS News, was accused of attempting to curry favor with President Trump by paying, among other things, a $16 million settlement in his lawsuit over a 60 Minutes story on Kamala Harris.
So what's interesting about that settlement is, as we've told you, this is a case that by most legal experts, CBS, Paramount would have easily won, but they were desperate for a deal. Paramount is in major trouble financially. They have a lot of cable channels in the year 2025, which is not a good place to be. They needed this merger with Skydance to go down. So they paid that settlement. They have made a lot of concessions here. They're promising a review of CBS News. They're promising more diverse political voices. They're promising an ombudsman of CBS News who will be like sort of self-critical. They have promised not to implement any DEI policies. They're hiring an independent official to help oversee the organization. So a lot of concessions here that the Trump administration has extracted. It really sets a new precedent here for what one can expect for an FCC approval. Typically, FCC is looking for the interests of the consumers, making sure that certain companies aren't getting too large. This specifically was a negotiation based on things Trump wanted to see. And that sort of sets a new precedent for other deals that may go before the government here in the coming years. One thing I should mention here is the FCC vote was along party lines, 2-1. There's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Whoever the president is, they typically have the majority commissioners. And the one minority vote here, or the Democratic vote, they voted against it. Her name is Ana Gomez. She says she was troubled by the payout here, and she believes what she calls this reckless approval has emboldened those who believe the government can and should abuse its power to extract financial and ideological concessions. You've also seen folks like Elizabeth Warren and some Democratic senators who have been very critical of this. Jill, sticking with media news here, the gutting of local newsrooms. This story comes to us from Axios. About 2/3 of counties in the U.S. across the country have a below average number of local journalists based on historical trend lines. This all comes as old business models are faltering and newsrooms are scrambling for sustainability. This matters a lot. Many American neighborhoods are lacking adequate news coverage to cover everything from school board meetings to your local police to local elections, local sports, cultural events. So, the important stuff, the cultural stuff. And what that means now is that people are increasingly dependent on national news. Everything's become nationalized in DC when we know that the most important things that typically impact your lives are happening locally and the state level. And we've seen this, Jill, nearly 75% of media institutions have closed over the last 20 years. You saw the internet, you saw social media, and local news was just not able to adapt the business model. They depended on classified ads. Remember classifieds? You could sell your books, your cars, your homes. Well, that all went the way of Craigslist and Zillow and all those various websites, right? They never replaced that income. And then you had advertising. Well, advertisers have found that they can go directly, they go social media, they can be much more strategic through Google or Facebook in terms of targeting people. So they don't need to just throw up an ad in the local newspaper and hope that you turn to page 16 and you saw that ad, right? So ultimately here, the US now has about 8 local journalists for every 100,000 people. That is down 75% from about 20 years ago. And Jill, this applies to small towns, but this also applies to areas with growing populations, like the Houston area, the Portland area. What that means is the local journalists who are left, again, some key stuff isn't getting covered. What is getting covered? Local crime. So you might get some crime coverage, but that also then leads you to believe that there's much more crime than there is sometimes. So it can really sort of warp your reality based on the local news coverage that you're getting. And again, they're trying to figure out how to fix this. There have been some philanthropists who've been trying to get into the mix. Some local institutions have tried a nonprofit model, the Salt Lake Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times. It's worked better in Salt Lake, not so much for the Sun-Times in Chicago, but that's a model that we're looking at as well. Jill, I know you began your career and spent a lot of time in local news.
Yeah, not only did I work in Lansing, Michigan, which had just a couple of local stations, but I also worked for a local station on Long Island. And Long Island, like many of the suburbs around big cities across the country, they don't get a lot of coverage by the quote unquote city stations because there's so much going on. And there are limited resources and a limited amount of time that the broadcast is on the air. So in terms of some of the bigger markets, even though there might be more local reporters and they might have more resources, there's just so many more stories and so many more people. And so even in those markets, a lot of them are not getting told.
Yeah, and remember, local news is the one that's discovering that the local company is polluting, is discovering that the local mayor is corrupt, is discovering that there's abuse by a local police department, is talking about, areas related to education or health or issues that people are facing locally. Less local news, less coverage of that, the less ability there is to fix those things. And the more complaining there is that Washington must fix it, when in fact, this is a local issue. So this is something we'll continue to track here at Mo News. All right, next up in tech news, we have from CNET, Apple releasing a beta preview version of its next iPhone operating system called iOS 26. The release on Thursday means that members of the public with recent iPhones can preview how the device's interface will change in the fall. So if you want to check this out, you can head over to Apple's website and you can enroll in this. It applies to folks in the US and several other countries, so you can check out the new operating system if it's something that excites you and you're interested in it. It will mark, I warn you, one of the biggest changes to the user interface design in more than 10 years now. They're calling this look liquid glass, and it'll replace many of the familiar buttons and menus. So it's going to take some getting used to. So maybe there's a reason to do the beta program so you can start to get used to it as the rest of us experience it this fall. The buttons are supposed to mimic the look of glass that flows like liquid. And Apple's looking forward to your feedback here, because it often will roll out a beta and then tweak things accordingly. Remember when they were going to rearrange the buttons on the phone portion, like where the end call button was, and everyone freaked out? We posted about this on Instagram. Well, this time around, they're going to probably be rolling out a bunch of things. And if you don't like it, you can let them know. Now, one of the things that continues to be missing here is, remember they promised like a much smarter Siri? Siri still feels like she's stuck 10 years ago, especially as compared to ChatGPT and other AI. Well, they've been saying for a while now, we're rolling out our AI. It's called Apple Intelligence. That's what AI stands for over at Apple. Well, they promised those 2 years ago. We still haven't seen them. They might come next year, but they're not going to be part of this beta program right now, though they have added some new features, including real-time translations inside iMessage, FaceTime, the ability to visually search using information inside a screenshot. And so, for example, if you take a picture of a scene, apparently you can screenshot and find like something you like, a piece of furniture or something in there, and then allegedly be able to look at that piece of furniture and allegedly take that photo of that specific, that item inside that photo, and then search on where to buy it. If you were somewhere and you're like, oh, I'd love to have one of those. So interesting features here, and we'll be on the lookout. And the next story is something we featured on our Instagram page yesterday: the strength of passports around the world. There's something called the Henley Passport Index, and they basically track by country's passport how many countries you get to go to visa-free. As of 10 years ago, the US allowed you the most visa-free travel. As of the latest ranking out this week, the U.S. has now dropped to number 10. And technically, since there's a lot of countries tied with each other, there are 33 countries now with passports that get you more visa-free access than the U.S. Number one in the world, Singapore. If you have a passport from Singapore, you get visa-free access to 193 countries around the world. That's followed by Japan and South Korea with 190. Then you got some European countries like Germany, Italy, Denmark, Spain with 189. The US right now at number 10. That means we have access to 182 countries around the world, visa-free. So it's basically about 11 countries globally. And, you're talking about the Irans and the Chinas and a few of those that don't allow US travelers visa-free travel, but do allow a number of other countries visa-free travel. On the other end of that list, the countries that give you the least access to the world, not surprising here, we have Afghanistan with only 25 destinations, especially in light of the Taliban taking over there. Only 25 countries allow visa-free travel to people from Afghanistan. Then you have Syria, only 27 destinations, and then followed there by Iraq, Pakistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Nepal, all with about 30 to 35 countries that you can travel to. And finally here, from the Associated Press, Hulk Hogan, the legendary wrestler, died at the age of 71 yesterday from cardiac arrest. Police say there were no signs of foul play or suspicious activity. He apparently had gone through some surgeries of late, leading to the point where his wife had been pushing back on rumors that he was in a coma. Hulk Hogan became one of the most famous people in the world in the 1980s. He took professional wrestling mainstream, made it really explode. Wrestling, the sort of TV wrestling existed in the 60s and 70s, but in the 80s, it really goes to a new level there, partially due to Hulk Hogan. The WWE, previously known as the WWF, put out a statement saying one of pop culture's most recognizable figures, Hogan helped WWE achieve global recognition in the 1980s. He also starred in a number of movies, including one of the Rocky movies. I think it was Rocky 3, if memory serves me right. Now, I should say that's not his real name. He was born Terry Gene Bollea and then changed his name to Hulk Hogan. He headlined the first WrestleMania in 1985, teaming up with people like Mr. T and Roddy Piper. These names certainly mean something to Gen X. and millennials who grew up with these WrestleManias through the 80s and 90s. Other people he was wrestling with were like Andre the Giant and some of these other names who you might recall from a previous era. Now, Hogan also had a lot of controversy related to him. Just about 10 years ago, video recordings of him using the N-word leaked. He also referred to himself as racist to a point. There was also a major legal case related to a secretly recorded sex tape that Gawker had, and he, working with billionaire Peter Thiel, basically sued Gawker Media out of existence due to that. So again, a lot of personal issues there. He was controversial. He also became very political in recent years, becoming a huge Trump supporter. You might recall he was over at the RNC last summer, where he gave a speech endorsing President Trump and then literally ripped his shirt off. This is a thing Hulk did at his wrestling matches, but he did it live on stage at the Republican National Convention. Trump posting on Truth Social yesterday, "We lost a great friend today, the Hulkster. Hulk Hogan was MAGA all the way, strong, tough, smart, but with the biggest heart."
And it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, what are you watching?
Jill, we were talking about Long Island earlier, and you're there. I'm going to be watching the next part of the HBO documentary on the pride of Long Island, Billy Joel. The first part was fascinating, and I thought I knew stuff about his life, but I didn't know everything that he reveals in the documentary. So HBO split this into 2 parts, and part 2 is out this weekend. Jill, what are you watching?
I think I'm going to rewatch The Devil Wears Prada in honor of the whole gang getting back together, Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway. For the sequel, yes, if you hadn't heard, they're doing a Devil Wears Prada Part 2, and they're filming at least some of it in front of our offices at Industrious in Midtown Manhattan.
Yeah, we've been looking out for Meryl. We've been looking out for Anne. There's just huge crowds of people this week that have been looking for them. We've seen the catering truck. That's as much as I saw. Jill, what are you reading?
So Moshe, I went to our premium Slack channel. We have a whole reading section because I needed some ideas. And YL said that she just finished Summer Island and Homefront by Kristen Hanna, and that she also read Winter Garden and The Women. All of those books I've heard great things about.
All right. So you're reading 4 books this weekend, Jill.
And you know what? I hope to get to even one of them, but I figured I would just give them a shout out if anyone needs some good ideas.
I love seeing the conversations over there. A reminder, if you're a Mo News Premium member, you get access to our Slack channel where we have about 3,000 of you. And there's a parenting channel, a reading channel, a watching channel, and everyone is talking travel channel. And a lot of great conversations are happening over there.
Okay, Moshe, what are you reading?
Jill, I just got a copy in the mail of Alyssa Blass Campbell's book. It's a new book. It's coming out in September. She is the author of Tiny Humans, Big Emotions, which has been very widely read among a lot of parents. She now has a new book out called Big Kids, Bigger Feelings, Navigating Defiance, Meltdowns, Anxiety to Raise Confident Kids. The book is out in September, so we're getting an early read, and we're hoping to have her on the podcast. Jill, what are you eating this weekend?
So I'm going to a New Orleans themed event. So I imagine
king cakes,
crab cakes, anything New Orleans themed, I'll report back.
Cajun
gumbo
flavors, gumbo, po' boys, beignets, mufletta, jambalaya.
And Moshe, what are you eating?
Jill, we're big fans in the house right now of Top Seeds crackers. They're organic and gluten-free, but I use a but. And we're obsessed with them because sometimes you hear organic, gluten-free. No, these are like delicious. Olivia loves them. Alex brought them in, and I've become a huge snacker of Top Seeds. That's Top Seeds, one word, T-O-P, seeds with a Z.
All right, you've convinced me, Moshe. I'm always looking for a healthy snack.
Jill, Top Seeds with gumbo goes great.
All right, everyone. Thank you all for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See everyone back here on Monday.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.